The Allen Lund Company is celebrating 48 years in transportation. Stop by and see us at Matt's, booth 18193.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
A highway project in Oregon was designed to do several things. Among them, adding a lane to one of the country's most notable highway bottlenecks. But the project has become mired in various problems and is entangled in another debate in Oregon, the reform of the state's weight mile tax. I'll get an update on both issues from State Representative Shelley Bosshart Davis. Several different government and private systems track various information on truckers, but some truckers don't think that information is accurate and they want it changed. I'll talk with Alex Clark and David Grimes of CDL Legal. And finally, for some time we've reported on the Advisory Committee on Underride Protections. However, a number of factors involved have changed, and that raises some serious concerns. I'll get an update from Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today. The Mid-America Trucking Show in Louisville, Kentucky gave leaders of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration a chance to meet face-to-face with the trucking community. And there was plenty to talk about. The agency has several rulemakings coming down the pike this year, many of them controversial among commercial truck drivers. FMCSA's acting Deputy Administrator Sue Lawless addressed some of them during a speech. After thanking truck drivers for their hard work, Lawless ran down the list of advisory boards, studies, and task force that have launched in recent months, dedicated to things like lease purchase agreements, compensation, and detention time. She also reinforced that technology is going to play a big role in FMCSA's attempts to make roads safer.
We are always working to understand prevention. If we can understand prevention, then we have the ability to understand how and why crashes happen and to prevent them from happening. We're looking at root causes. All of the things that I'm talking about, driver compensation, driver leasing, are helping us understand why, a more granular understanding of the factors that can lead to crashes. We're always looking to leverage technology and to modernize technology to make the road safer. We continue to look for ways to encourage the adoption of technology that can prevent crashes.
We already knew FMCSA was looking to technology because of several regulations currently in the works. Larry Miner, FMCSA's Associate Administrator for Policy, provided updates on some of them. He alluded to current proposals for automatic emergency braking technology and speed limiters, among others, saying that more technology will reduce the number of crashes. FMCSA is scheduled to release more information on its speed limiter mandate proposal in May. A final rule on an automatic emergency braking mandate for heavy trucks is expected in April. A new research paper exposes some serious concerns about the cybersecurity of electronic logging devices. Researchers at Colorado State University say they found vulnerabilities that allow hackers to take control of a commercial truck, steal data, or even disrupt entire fleets. Using commonly available ELDs, researchers were able to gain access to them via Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. They say they even pulled off what they call the first ever wireless drive-by attack on a truck, as explained by master's student Jake Jepson in this video.
We drove up alongside the truck, we reflashed the electronic device, which is running its stock firmware, with a malicious firmware that will slow down the truck once it starts executing. We were successful in this attack. The car drove up alongside it. About 30 seconds later, the truck begins to slow down and the car pulls out ahead. Since it's a wireless attack, it gives us the freedom to explore creative attack vectors, including flying a drone. Critical infrastructure is becoming more and more connected, including trucks. One of the reasons is due to the ELD mandate. And when the ELD mandate first came out, it did not have much security in it. It could use many security improvements.
The Colorado State researchers behind the paper say they identified several critical vulnerabilities in a particular ELD model that makes up a significant share of the existing market. That manufacturer is said to be working on a firmware update right now. The researchers have also shared their findings with the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. One truck driver is dead and another is facing charges following a shooting at a truck stop in Pennsylvania early Friday morning. It happened at a Loves off Interstate 78 in Berks County. Pennsylvania State Police say 40-year-old James Hilton, a truck driver from New Jersey, was helping another trucker park when some sort of dispute broke out with someone else who was there. That someone else opened fire on Hilton, killing him. The suspect took off but was spotted and taken into custody about an hour later up the interstate. No other details have been released at this time. Updates as we get them. As the Michigan DOT considers allowing corrosive materials to be hauled across the Ambassador Bridge, the public is weighing in. A public hearing was held last week about the proposal, which would expand regulations of hazardous materials. Dozens of people logged in virtually, many expressing concerns about public safety. Trucking industry stakeholders, however, spoke out in favor of the proposal, including some drivers who pointed out that they're already currently forced to reroute to Port Huron's Blue Water Bridge when hauling hazmat materials, which can mean up to 200 miles of extra driving time. The Michigan DOT conducted a traffic study as part of the proposed change, which found that the difference was not significant enough to make a compelling case for or against any changes. Trimac Transportation is growing. The Canadian carrier announcing the acquisition of North Carolina-based Feldspar Trucking. Feldspar will keep operating under its own name according to the terms of the deal. Feldspar has about 60 trucks and employs about the same number of drivers who haul materials for the ceramics and glass industries. Law enforcement throughout Pennsylvania have started a weeks-long crackdown on aggressive driving. Several dozen agencies in 5 counties across the state are taking part alongside Pennsylvania State Police. They'll be looking out for the bad driving behaviors you likely see a lot of out on the road, including speeding, tailgating, cutting off other drivers, and more. To catch them, law enforcement will use traffic enforcement zones, saturation patrols, and speed enforcement details, among other methods. Pennsylvania DOT data shows that there were nearly 1,300 crashes attributed to aggressive driving last year in the 5 counties taking part in this enforcement blitz. Wyoming is upgrading its 511 website and web cameras to provide more reliable and secure service to the public. In a news release, the Wyoming DOT said they maintain more than 200 web cameras across the state that capture photos of road conditions every few minutes. WYDOT says its website had more than 2 billion hits in 2022. Based on that traffic, its Intelligent Transportation Systems team recently made updates to create a more dependable and secure website. Those who have wyoroad.info bookmarked in their web browsers should update that bookmark. The Wyoming DOT says users who rely on third-party aggregations of the website data may experience interruptions in service due to the upgrades. In addition to the online upgrades, transportation officials are replacing 61 broken or outdated cameras and related infrastructure across the state. Shell Rotella continued its support of OOIDA's Safe Driving Award program at the Mid-America Trucking Show. Julie Wright is the brand and media manager for Shell Rotella. She presented OOIDA's Executive Vice President, Louis Pugh, with a check for $5,000.
So safety is key to the Shell culture, and this aligns perfectly with our greater corporate stance. And driver safety is hugely important to us, and celebrating the drivers who maintain those safe driving records is an important part of the industry.
Every year, OOIDA recognizes and rewards members for their safe, crash-free years. Safe Driving Awards are available to eligible OOIDA members who qualify based on the number of years for which the member has operated a commercial vehicle without being involved in a preventable crash. And finally, Peterbilt and Rush Truck Centers announced a $1.5 million donation to 2 trucking industry charities during the Mid-America Trucking Show. Truckers Against Trafficking will be getting $750,000, so will Wreaths Across America. The money was raised during an auction for the last ever produced Model 389. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Next, I'll get an update on 2 big trucking issues in Oregon from State Representative Shelley Bosshart Davis. Alex Clark and David Grimes of CDL Legal join the program to discuss fixing errors on your record, and we'll cover concerns about the FMCSA's Underride Advisory Committee with Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. We'll be back in just a moment. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
Buckling up keeps everyone safe on the roads. Learn more at www.sharetheroadsafely.gov. Paid for by FMCSA.
Landline Now, welcome back. A highway project in Oregon was designed to do several things. Among them, adding a lane to one of the country's most notable highway bottlenecks, enabling better movement of both traffic and freight. But the project has become mired in various problems and is entangled in another debate in Oregon, this one over the state's weight mile tax. State Representative Shelley Bosshart Davis is one of the state lawmakers involved in both issues, the Rose Quarter project on Interstate 5 and the weight mile tax. I spoke with her recently for an update on both. Well, first of all, let's start with the Rose Quarter project. And for those who aren't familiar, I'm wondering if you can explain what the Rose Quarter project is and where it's located.
Yeah, excellent. The Rose Quarter project is located in Portland, Oregon. It's actually, I think at the last one I checked, it's either the 28th or 29th bottleneck in the nation, which for little old Oregon is pretty substantial because you wouldn't think that. It's also the only stretch of Interstate 5 from Canada to Mexico that is 2 lanes in an urban area. The only stretch of I-5 that is 2 lanes, which is just mind-boggling that still exists, 2 lanes in a metro area like that.
Okay. What exactly is Oregon looking to do to fix this situation? Can you walk us through what exactly their plan is?
Yeah, back in 2017, before I was a legislator, so I was elected and my first session was in 2019. So before I was elected in 2017, we had the largest transportation package passed by the legislature that time. It was a $5.3 billion project. And part of the agreement to that the truckers agreed to was a large increase in the weight mile tax. And their promise was that they would add a lane to the Rose Quarter area. That area that I said was 2 lanes, they're to add a lane to help reduce congestion and help get trucks moving through. It obviously wasn't that straightforward, but that was the biggest ask in their support. And in return, the truckers supported that package. That was in 2017. So we're now looking at 2024. Not only is it still not shovel ready, the project cost has changed drastically. I believe the original cost was $500 million or less, and the cost has ballooned today to $1.7 billion. And part of that problem is many of the areas in Portland in that area right around Rose Quarter have really pushed back against adding the lane for construction, whatever the reason may be. And so they have put together this huge project that's going to cost $1.7 billion, including putting a lid over the freeway. So this is a monstrosity of a project. And I will note that those that agreed to the project, those are going to be City of Portland, the neighborhoods around it, even the Trailblazers. The Portland Trailblazers was part of those discussions that have agreed to this project. They're not the ones paying for it. The taxpayers are the ones paying for it. Now, you and I, if we're going to build a house and say, build your dream house, and somebody else is going to pay for it, you and I are probably going to build a pretty incredible house if somebody else is picking up the bill. So, there was problems from the beginning, but the point is 7 years after the promise was made, it's still not shovel ready.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the cover on that. As I understand it, part of what they're trying to do here is connect up local streets that the highway kind of cut off from one another.
Yeah, the highway.
Is that right?
Yes, and that is accurate, and that does actually need to be taken into account, which then adds, how often are you creating real estate, right? How often are we actually creating real estate that can actually be built on? So that's another part of the conversation that is really exasperating the problem and the timeline and the cost. That again, there's massive reasons, or there's so many reasons to be able to add a lane, and one of them was it was a basic promise.
Looking at that situation and knowing that there's kind of a national movement right now to reconnect urban neighborhoods. So, obviously that's part of what's happening there with these streets going over that interstate cover. But what do you think the possibilities are that they would look at this and try and drop the additional freight capacity on that highway and just keep all the rest of the stuff?
And I understand where you're coming from, is that basically they would take and we got a $450 million investment from the U.S. Department of Transportation, which I'm grateful for. Again, if the price tag is 1.7, it's still not enough. Where are we going to come up with the other? And to your point, if they take that money, reconnect neighborhoods, and then don't put any emphasis on the freight, will they do that? And my first response would be no, they won't. And that's because we have a looming ODOT, for our Oregon Department of Transportation, budget shortfall. Everybody's talking about a 2025 transportation package, and you're not going to get truckers to come to the table if you first can't answer that specific question. You promised us in 2017, what are you going to do for us now? And so I think that's why my answer would be they won't be able to just do the neighborhood portion without doing the freight portion, because they have to, because it was a broken promise and we need to fix that.
Let me switch over to another topic here, and that is something that you and I have discussed before, which is efforts to reform the weight mile tax there in Oregon, which you mentioned earlier, of course, is part of this whole deal with the Rose Quarter project. And I'm wondering if we can start, just for folks who didn't hear our earlier conversation, kind of describing what the situation is in Oregon regarding trucking operations and the weight mile tax.
Yes. And going back to the 2017 transportation package, the truckers agreed to a 53% increase over the course of 10 years. That's staggering, right? And it actually has put us, and again, promises were made for the agreement to take that kind of tax increase. And that has put us in the number one slot for cost to operating a truck in the nation. And we're actually almost $7,000 per truck more expensive than even California, which is shocking. You would think that California would be number one, but no, actually Oregon is by $7,000 per truck. And so part of that problem is that our taxes are simply too much. We have in Oregon what is called the weight mile tax. This is very complicated. We're obviously overpaying. And the reports that have been given to the legislature as of just this last year in 2023 is that we're overpaying by more than 30% of what we should be. And so in Oregon, we have what's called cost responsibility or cost allocation, where there should be an equity between what the cars, the light vehicles, and what the trucks, the heavy vehicles are paying. And we are overpaying to the tune of over 30%. And it's about over last year and this year will be about $500 million in overpayment by trucks. And so we're out of balance. It's actually in our Oregon Constitution to be in balance. And so we have a major problem right now that at this point, we've now gone through 2 legislative sessions where we've had bills to fix this issue, or at least put us back to my bill this last year, put us back to the 2020 rates to at least get us more in parity or more fair so that we can fix it in the future. All of those bills have failed, and there just is not a priority put by the majority party here in Oregon in order to fix that problem.
Are those bills all dead for the year? Is it a possibility they could come back up again?
And in addition to the 2 legislative sessions, we also tried to call ourselves into special session 2, which also failed. So to answer your question, yes, and that's because the legislature is not in session any longer. And so we had a 5-week, what's called a short session in even years, and that ended the first
first week of March. So it just ended a few weeks ago. And once the session's over, all bills are dead.
Okay. So looking ahead here, obviously you've got another session coming up next year and the year after that. Have you already started efforts in terms of preparing to get some bills introduced again to try and address the situation?
Yeah, there's two things going on. One is there's a lawsuit. The Oregon Trucking Association and 3 carriers sued the state of Oregon for this particular, for overpayment or over taxed on this weight mile tax. And so that is moving its way through the courts right now. So that is happening. And then also preparing for this quote unquote 2025 transportation package. There are not just conversations, it is the top conversation. There, as you know, transportation is extremely complicated. Who pays for it? How does it work? Congestion, supply chain. I mean, it is extremely complicated, even for those that have been in the business, for years and years. I own a trucking company. My parents started it in 1983. And so I basically grew up in the industry. And so even those that understand the industry, it's complicated. And so to try to explain this to other lawmakers is very tough. And then you throw in some of these problems and a budget shortfall, and we're going to have a large undertaking moving into 2025. But this is the not just top priority for people, it's just part of the conversation, and not just part, it's the number one thing. And every table that I'm sitting at, and I'm vice chair of the transportation committee, so it's most of those tables. What are we going to do about Rose Quarter? How are we going to fix weight mile? And so that's going to be a top conversation piece moving into 2025.
You mentioned the majority party there in the state, and you said they didn't have any feeling of urgency in terms of trying to address the weight mile tax disparity. Do you think that there's something that they want in exchange for getting that, or something that might allow them to move into some kind of compromise that could address the weight mile tax?
Yeah, I think overall that's going to be those negotiations. But I think the number one problem that it's not a priority is because it's very politically inexpedient. It's not politically expedient to talk transportation. It's not a win. Oregonians don't like tolling. We don't have tolling. They hate tolling. And so the governor, our governor of the state of Oregon, just took tolling off and basically announced we're not going to toll, which was a political response to Oregonians absolutely hating it, which then puts more pressure and responsibility on the legislature for sure. But it's just not a political talking point that anybody wants to touch. It's expensive. It's complicated. It's there's a lot of things that people don't like. Gas tax, of course. They don't like tolling. They don't like congestion. They don't like all of these things. So it's not it's a political hot potato. And I think that's the number one reason why you're seeing the majority party shy away from it. It's a tough conversation.
And people, I know this is obvious to people like you and I that deal with this all the time, but people don't get that without a gas tax, they're not going to have those roads, and they kind of like the roads.
Right, exactly. And it turns out that Oregon was the first one in the nation to have a gas tax. I can't remember the year, but decades and decades and decades ago, it is a tool to pay for the roads. So how are we going to do that moving forward? And we both realize that, as more and more people choose to drive EVs, and I think that could change in the future too, because of some of the other things we're seeing. We're seeing car makers decide not to build as many. We see a lot of political pressure. If the administration changes in the United States, that priority will probably change too. So I think that is uncertain. But right now we have more EVs on the road than we have, 10 years ago. And if they're not paying a gas tax, then they're using the road. They're providing congestion because they're still using the same space on the road. And they're not paying the gas tax, and so they're not paying for the road. And I think I know studies are also showing that they're heavier vehicles, they're tearing up the roads a bit more, and they're using the same tires. But because those vehicles are heavier, they're actually producing more tire wear and that kind of pollution as well. So you're seeing all of these factors coming into play that we didn't have 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, that need to be part of the conversation moving forward. How do you pay for the roads, not just with the gas tax, but also how are EVs fairly paying for the roads as well?
That was Oregon State Representative Shelley Bosshart Davis talking about two issues in that state involving the trucking industry: the Rose Quarter Project on Interstate 5, and the Weight Mile Tax. For Landline Now, I'm Mark Redding. We'll be back with more of our program in just a moment.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a CAT scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget misaccuracy when you're truck on a CAT scale.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. What truckers do while out on the road is tracked in many different ways. Several different government and private systems track various information, with government systems working off inspections and tickets, and private systems using information from motor carriers. But some truckers don't think some of that information is accurate, and they want it changed. So how do you go about that? I asked Alex Clark and David Grimes of CDL Legal. Well, guys, the topic is how to get something off your federal safety record. And first of all, your federal safety record is not just one thing, obviously. There's a lot of different components to it and different systems your information is in. So can we start by giving folks an idea of what information we're talking about and what systems that information is in?
Sure, Mark. So since we're talking more to drivers out there, the thing they're most concerned with is their PSP and the crashes, and then the CSA score for the carrier, because obviously that still affects them if they're not an independent driver. So the PSP is the pre-employment screening report, and on that contains anything that you've had in an inspection. If you have a violation in an inspection, it's on your PSP. And just to take off some misnomers that drivers have said to me, this is not something that the carrier can put on your record. This goes through the DOT and is administered by the FMCSA. So if I have drivers who've called me and said, my carrier put this on me. Well, that's a different report entirely. And then the next thing they generally want to know is, okay, I got this violation. Can I get rid of it? And the answer is yes and no. So I'm not hedging my bets, but so to get something off of your PSP from an inspection, you need to challenge that through a data queue request. And I've done lots of those, of course. The thing that you want to look at particularly is there a ticket associated with this violation? Because if there's a ticket associated with this violation on the inspection, then you can fight the ticket. And if you win in court, either a dismissal or a reduction, then you can use that court record to fight. If it's a dismissal, it goes off your PSP entirely if you do a data queue. If it's a reduction, it doesn't go off the PSP, but it does reduce the points associated with it. And that's also very important for the carrier, for their SMS score too. So if you get a 15 over, which would be, a 10-point violation and sometimes a job killer, but you even get it reduced to 10 over, any reduction to a maintenance violation, then that takes the resulting score for the carrier down to 1 point, and they're going to be a whole lot happier with you if that's the case. Now, the second way to do a data queue is to directly challenge the information provided by the officer, and this is a whole different standard. To do that, you need actual proof. You can't just say, well, the officer, didn't see this or didn't. That's not going to fly. And one of the ways we've seen recently. So I'll just give you a little story. A driver was driving along. He was talking on the phone, but he was on a headset. But his right hand was waving back. I don't know why I'm waving on the waving back and forth, and it looked like he was talking and everything. But they had an inward-facing camera. Well, the officer pulled up right next to him. Immediately, the guy in the passenger seat, the officer looked up and saw him waving his arms and talking, and so he assumed he was on the phone. But we were able to use the video to make a data queue challenge, and it was clear, and that was one of those that came back in one day. So, if you have cameras, can be your best friend. They can also be your worst enemy, but if you have cameras, that's a way. But the reality is like for most other violations, you have to have some proof that it wasn't that the violation wasn't written correctly.
Okay. I know that folks have a lot of, for lack of a better term, fallacies about how to go about this and things that they think will help that are actually not helpful, but they commonly will try to do in this situation. Can you kind of give us some examples of that?
Well, okay. So in talking with the officer, they'll say, well, I wasn't texting, I wasn't talking on the phone, or something like that, or I was only looking at my phone because I wanted to know what time it was. And so the rule states in a case like that it's illegal to have the phone in your hand. And so it doesn't matter if you're using it or not. And I don't know if that was what you were looking for in that question, or if there's something else.
Well, I know you've talked before about how some people will go in there and basically expect it to be their word against the officers, or evidence that's not really the kind of admissible evidence that's going to help them.
Yeah, they'll send us videos of stuff that don't show anything. They'll take pictures 3 days later of the equipment violation. Well, it only matters at the time of the stop. And I do suggest for drivers to nicely, politely, respectfully ask the officer, especially with maintenance violations, can you point them out to me so I can take a picture? I want to be able to, I may forget. I want to be able to show them at the, when they're fixing it, exactly what they need to fix. And then if you go take it and the person happens to, the guy who's doing the maintenance, who will sign off on it, will say that this was not broken. There's nothing wrong with it. You at least have a chance. The officer can still say, hey, look, at the time that light was not working. And maybe it came on, maybe it was a loose wire, who knows what it was. But you at least give yourself a chance with something like that.
Yeah, and remember that some camera systems and cell phones will actually time and date stamp a photograph. So that's something you definitely want to have turned on in your phone.
Yes.
Let's talk about a slightly different issue here. And that's if something on my record is wrong and I want to fix it. And I want to start with the MVR. And before we get into the fixing of that, I'm wondering if you could just very briefly explain what the MVR is and how it differs from the other systems we talked about, like PSP and CSA.
Sure thing, Mark. So an MVR stands for Motor Vehicle Record or Motor Vehicle Report. And what it is anything that goes against the driver's license is going to show up on that record. Specifically, for traffic issues, it's going to be traffic tickets and crashes are going to be the main things that are seen there. Now, because it's related to the driver's license, there's also information about the driver's medical certification, possible suspensions or warrants, things that just sort of come up over time as people just have records related to their driving. But for the purposes of things on the record that could affect these commercial drivers, crashes and tickets are the things we see most commonly.
Okay. Let's talk about the basic process here. If you have something in your MVR that you think is incorrect, you want to get it fixed. Alex talked about the different processes you have to use and what does or doesn't work on PSP. What about the MVR? What's the process there and what sort of evidence would you need?
it's a good question. So with an MVR, the PSP is centralized because it's a federal kind of database, but MVRs are dependent upon the state. There's 50 different types of MVR because there's 50 different states, and each one is going to run it a little bit differently. We collect information from our attorneys about what's called expungement, which is the process of removing a record from your MVR. And that really is different for every single state. It can be very difficult. Oftentimes it is, usually expensive. And there's usually restrictions on whether or not it can be done within a certain period of time or only until after a certain period of time. So if a driver wants to get something removed from their record and they're like, hey, this is on my MVR, I got it 5 years ago and it's really affecting my ability to get a job, the best thing to do would be to contact an attorney who does traffic cases in that state and say, hey, based on your expertise, what do you think I can get done here?
Okay. Another item you mentioned is that some people may want to change on their record, which is their state of residence, changing that piece of information on there. Is this a simple matter of just what happens when you're moving, or are there other reasons you might be doing this?
Well, the reason that I brought that up is we don't see this often, but it's frequent enough for me to mention that sometimes records can get very turned around and mixed up when a driver changes state of residence. So things that may be 20 years old will come back and start to affect the driver. Notices of suspension put out by certain DMVs, or things like reassigned in the wrong place, cases coming back up that should have been dismissed. We see a lot of it. And a lot of it has to do with just simply human error in the recording as records are shifted over from one state to another. But it's always worthwhile, I think, for a driver who's changing home addresses from one state to another state to go back and ask for a copy of his driver's license record after he's made that change of address from both states, just to make sure there's not a landmine there that might come back to bite him. It's impossible to account for everything because you're talking about two different big bureaucracies where a lot of mistakes can happen. But a driver who is proactive in that one step may be able to cut off a problem of the past before he receives something in mail that says, hey, you have a suspension from the state you left 5 months ago.
Okay. Well, we're running out of time here. David, I'm wondering if there's anything else on this topic that you want to throw in real quick or that people need to know.
Absolutely. There's one more thing, and that's the DAC report. So Drive a Check, that's what that stands for, DAC, is held by HireRight, the private company. It's not a federal entity, not a government entity, but a lot of carriers will use the DAC, the DAC, to get an understanding about whether or not they should hire on a new driver. The way that it's separate from other records is that it's kind of an employment record, and carriers can put information on that record. They can submit it to HireRight that is just their opinion or things that they think are correct. And unless that's challenged by the driver directly with HireRight, and HireRight has a process for challenging and correcting that record, unless that's done, then that's kind of what people will see whenever you try to go get another job. Now, remember, it's not related directly to anything on an official government record. It's just what your previous employers have said about you. So if you think it's wrong, you better go change it. And HireRight is in the business of having correct information. So if you think you can, you should.
Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you very much for all the information.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
I've been talking with David Grimes and Alex Clark of CDL Legal, a legal services provider for the trucking industry. You can learn more by calling CDL Legal at 913-738-4836 or by going to their website, cdllegal.com. Again, that phone number is 913-738-4836 or go to cdllegal.com. And you can find all that information on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the photo or headline at the top of the page. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and information. Please stay with us through a short commercial break. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Capital Reman, your leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, is celebrating its 10th anniversary. Let us help you avoid costly downtime and repairs by visiting capitalreman.com today. Use code OOIDA10 to receive your member benefits.
Stock up on Howe's Diesel Treat, the nation's most trusted anti-gel. And to be safe from the harshest winter conditions, make sure you have Howe's Diesel Lifeline on hand, the fastest-acting gelling rescue product. Available nationwide, Howe's products are designed to keep you rolling through the toughest conditions. Visit howesproducts.com.
Attention professional drivers, are you behind on your tax filings? You owe money? Integrity Tax Relief Group frees drivers from IRS trouble. You watch the road, we'll keep an eye on the IRS. Call now. 855-976-4291.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now. Welcome back. For some time, we've reported on the Advisory Committee on Underride Protections, a group that will advise FMCSA on the issue. However, since the committee started its work, a number of factors involved have changed, and that raises some serious concerns from the point of view of truckers. Here to bring us up to date is Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. Colin, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for having some time to share with us here.
Sure.
Let's start by reviewing what this committee was created for, because I think that's really kind of what we're concerned about, is that they've gotten off the track on that. So let's start with that.
Yeah, the committee was created in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as IIJA, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the Highway Bill, whatever you want to call it. The bill authorized the U.S. Department of Transportation to establish the Advisory Committee on Underride Protection, with the goal of coming up with broad stakeholder-supported recommendations, and we'll come back to that, why that long pause I had, because it's very relevant. But they required the committee to come up with recommendations on safety regulations that would reduce injuries and fatalities related to underride crashes. And when these advisory committees are established, it's typical that Congress wants the stakeholders from all sides of the issue, from safety advocacy groups to folks like our members, to come together and come up with recommendations that work for all stakeholders, because clearly the issue has kind of reached loggerheads on Capitol Hill. I mean, we know that a lot of safety advocates who are pushing for underride guard requirements had bills introduced in the House and the Senate over the years. They didn't get much steam because the issue is very contentious. We have a lot of concerns with those proposals. We have a lot of concerns with what the safety advocates want to impose on truckers in regards to underride. So I think Congress realized that they weren't getting anywhere legislatively. So they said, let's create this committee and let all the stakeholders hash out what sort of recommendations they can provide, not only Congress, but the U.S. Department of Transportation, in an attempt to update and modernize policies involving underride. Unfortunately, like you said, I think that has been derailed a bit. I think a lot of the safety advocacy representatives on the committee, who have a numerical advantage, let's be clear about that, want to further reduce the input, the views, the concerns of industry, and are using their numerical advantage in the committee roster to pass some motions we think are taking things in the wrong way if you want to legitimize the committee and its recommendations and do so in a transparent and fair manner.
I want to explore a little bit more deeply some of the things you said. You talked about their numerical advantage and that the FMCSA and Congress wanted to do this from all sides of the issue. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about the makeup of this committee. I mean, you mentioned the safety advocates are on there. How many of them and who else is on there and how many of them?
Well, Congress, in fairness, did a good job making sure they were thorough in identifying who should be represented on this panel, if we're being totally honest. I mean, there's there's crash scene investigators, there's family members of folks who have been injured or unfortunately perished in underride crashes. There's trailer industry representatives. There's a small trucking business representative who happens to be Doug Smith of OOIDA's board of directors. ATA is represented. They did a good job in making sure that everyone who has a stake in this game has a voice on the panel. Unfortunately, from our perspective, it's not well balanced between the two sides. I mean, we went into this committee knowing that there was a numerical advantage on the side of folks who want to see mandates passed and implemented on our industry. And we knew it would be difficult to kind of create that balance between stakeholders in recommendations. And unfortunately, despite the fact that they do have a numerical advantage, a lot of these folks are pushing to further minimize industry views. And that's what's really concerning about this. I mean, we knew what we were getting into when we saw the complexion of the membership of the committee, but now they're taking it a bit further by trying to basically weed out industry concerns with some of the proposals that they want to advance and include in this final report that the committee produces.
Give us some examples of that.
Yeah, so they want to change the definition of quorum, which is silly to us. I mean, they basically want it to be a simple, let me go back. They want to change the definition of consensus to be a simple majority. We kind of view consensus as something that has broad support among all stakeholders, all participants. And we go back to previous advisory committees that the U.S. Department of Transportation has overseen, where only a couple of dissenting views would declare something not being a consensus. And here we have this committee pursuing policies that would make a simple majority be a consensus. And I mean, anyone can hear that and say, well, that's clearly not the definition of consensus. What are they up to? But then they wanted to go a step further and change the definition of a quorum to make sure that, well, not to make sure that, but it creates a scenario where if you combine the new definition of consensus and the new definition of quorum, you only really need about 25% of committee members to pass motions to include things in this final report of recommendations. And we know that's not what Congress intended when they created this committee. So I think Congress and U.S. DOT now need to come back and say, whoa, folks, 25% is not the type of consensus we were hoping to see from this committee when we established it. So let's go back to the drawing board and make sure that you're focusing on proposals, policies that can get broad support among all stakeholders to include in your final report.
And just to clarify for folks listening, quorum is basically what percentage of the committee members have to be there in order for them to conduct any business at all.
It is. And, from our perspective, Doug Smith has been participating on all of these meetings, taking time out of his day to volunteer to do it. If folks are concerned that there's just simply not enough participation among committee members, maybe that's something we should talk about, not just going in and changing definitions in a way that will benefit certain factions of stakeholders. And I think anyone who hears that they're going to attempt to change consensus and quorum would say something fishy's going on here, and maybe there needs to be more oversight from the department, which is what we're pursuing right now.
So OOIDA is communicated to the DOT and to Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg in a letter. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit. Obviously, some of the things we've discussed were covered in the letter. What else did the letter say?
Well, there's also been motions to require NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, who has a stake in this, to produce all kinds of data that we don't necessarily think is relevant to the development of policies that will affect today's highway and vehicle conditions. I mean, safety advocates want to go back to 1970 to produce documentation involving underride guards. I mean, I don't know what values 60-year-old information will have in shaping productive and constructive recommendations for this panel to put forward to U.S. DOT and Congress. But here we are, and we think conditions on our highways and with the production of trucks and trailers have changed quite a bit since 1970, and we're not really sure how that information will be relevant, but it's going to gum up the works, certainly. I mean, we think this committee needs to be focused on coming up with proposals that industry supports, safety advocacy groups support, manufacturers support, engineers support. Having NHTSA just go back to the 1970s to find documentation on this isn't going to shape a report in a positive way. It's not going to make a clear and concise final product. So even some of these motions involving what NHTSA should be doing to help the committee, we think are kind of superfluous and might end up being rather irrelevant because the information is so dated and incomplete. But basically what we're saying in this letter is, DOT, I mean, we all see what's going on. It's time to reintroduce some fairness, some transparency, some oversight of the administration of this committee, because it's really kind of become chaotic and gone off the rails. And if this committee has any hope of producing a report that is legitimate and reputable and clear and concise, DOT needs to start getting more involved in its governance.
Okay, well, Colin, we're out of time, but it's fascinating stuff. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I've been talking with Colin Long of OOIDA. That's our program. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife.
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.